Psychologically, it wears down on you. So many times we think about what it must be like to live under a terrorist state. And sometimes you deal with the same psychological issues. We have people who are afraid to go certain places because of the trauma that they've experienced. We did a funeral a little over 2 months ago for a young man who was killed in a drive-by, and all he was going to do was pick up his prom date. It had nothing. He just went to go pick her up, and he was in a car with his best friend, and somebody mistakenly shot up the wrong car, killed him. His best friend witnessed the murder, and it was tragic. And when we did the funeral, hundreds of the kids from the neighboring high school came to that funeral, and they were all under great stress and trauma. So the week after his funeral was the graduation, and it was, instead of a joyous occasion, it was much more somber.
And that happens. That happens routinely in the
Yes.
community you serve.
The thing about it is, in Islandview, where Church of the Messiah is, there is not much gun violence directly in that community and neighborhood. It's mostly surrounded by it. But we have been working on it for the past 17 years. We've made a concerted effort to be able to deal with the root causes of gun violence. And that, a lot of times, are the things that people don't talk about. We have to get down to the root causes, which is more societal issues, more than anything else. One of the things that we're really trying to work on is really getting down to those causes, really helping with things like employment. And we do a lot of employment for people who are returning citizens. So people who may be felons, we really try to help them get jobs. And we're working with Judge Kelly Ramsey out of Frank Murphy Hall of Justice. And she sends us over people who need help. And so we try to help them with everything from employment, but sometimes even food, sometimes housing, getting a driver's license, clothing, resume writing, all of those things. But also, too, we do a lot with entrepreneurship. We have 213 units of affordable housing. We do a lot with young people and mentoring. So it takes a lot to be able to do this, but we just cannot just sit back and allow this to happen in our community and neighborhood without taking proactive steps.
So this is not just a law enforcement issue.
No.
And when we talk about violence in the city, we look to the police, and we look to the police for solutions, for answers. But this goes well beyond law enforcement.
Absolutely. With us, we look at it from a point of view of it's a societal issue. Law enforcement is also part of our society, and they have a particular job that they have to do. But sometimes you're going to need people who are boots on the ground. You do need politician. You need the business leaders. It's going to take everybody to be able to do this. But part of the reason why we do the work that we do is because we couldn't wait for everybody to come to the table. There were certain things we had to do right then, and we're continuously working to make this happen.
So do you sense at all that Detroit has a comprehensive anti-violence strategy, anti-gun violence strategy?
Absolutely not. It's one of those things where it's going to take a lot of work. When you stop and think about what is the true cost of gun violence, what does it cost? Not just from the point of view of a person who may be shot, and sometimes we think about the person is murdered. Now, when you stop and think about that, like with Frankie was murdered. And then that brings in everything from now she needs funeral services. Now it brings into how is that going to affect her children? How is that going to affect the income of the family, which was a two-income family. Now there's one income, and the dad is there with 7 children, and he's going to need other types of help. We don't think about that. Hospitalization. It's so many things to think about.
You know, you watch that and you listen to that, and you listen to all the things that Pastor Barry says that they're working on with kids and trying to build different kind of relationships. But what was your thought in
Well, I
seeing
mean,
that?
my first thought is that he's got the right idea, right? That this is not, I think when we talk about this problem in the city, often we talk about it as a policing problem, we talk about it as a prosecutorial problem. We don't talk enough about the culture change that needs to take place in this city, in different communities, in many different communities, where we value life a lot more, both inside the community and from outside, right? A lot of people in in Islandview don't feel like they matter. They don't feel like their lives matter. There are a lot of reasons for that, and we've got to start attacking those. Pastor Barry's working miracles, I think, at trying to do it from his end, but there are a lot of other things that need to be done in terms of creating opportunity, in terms of investing in education, and all of the other things that are broken in those communities to really solve that.
And that's just really one church and one organization,
Yeah.
but you know that there's a number of people that are trying to do this in small little pockets and small ways around the city.
And you know, his point is, it's fine to after these shootings, to have the conversation about legislation and what we need to do in terms of guns, and he said, but we've also got to address the mindset that says it's okay when you get in a beef over a basketball game to grab a gun and start shooting up a place. There's something wrong with that. And he talked about the hopelessness and poverty, and changing the way people think about life and the way they value life. But he said, what impressed me, he said 300 people go to that church out there at Church of the Messiah. Every single one of them knows someone who's been murdered, and they have a room. We did our interview the first time in a room of the church that's set aside to honor the murder victims from that community, and there are pictures all over the walls, and it really does drive it home.
And I get the sense from you, though, Nolan, is that you're also chafing against the fact that we don't feel like, are we taking this seriously enough, or that we're just not, it's just another shooting, another day, another violence. You talked about the attack on the young girl who was killed by dogs, that we're just, it's just passing us by saying, well, another, what can we do?
We just shrug. And I don't know how any of us eats today, sleeps today, thinking about what happened to that young girl this week in Detroit, 9 years old, doing what kids do, riding her bicycle on the streets of an American city. She wasn't in the outback, or she wasn't swimming in the ocean, and she was eaten alive by 3 pit bulls. Think about the horror, and how can we just shrug?
So where do we take the outrage, or how do we change the way we're now perceiving this?
I mean, again, there are a lot of aspects of American life that devalue life. The gun culture is one of them. The popular culture, which also devalues life. Historic and systemic racism, which devalues life in cities like Detroit, so that when somebody who's African American or Latino is killed, we don't have the same outrage as when somebody else is. I mean, all of these things sort of conspire together to make us sort of inured, I think, to the kind of outrage that we ought to have.
A lot to keep talking about. It was a great segment on your radio show.